Welcome back to the channel, The Real History of Football, Sheffield, the home of football. If you like football and its history, then you're in the right place. This is now our 13th video, and the last in the series, which is trying to show why the city of Sheffield in northern England is the true home of association football. This video is about summarising and concluding all we've done in the first 12 videos. This is to try and paint the full picture, the full argument as to why Sheffield truly is association football's the biggest game on the planet, truly is its true home. It's also to consider what we have learnt during the process. But before we do any summarising, where are we? This doesn't look like Sheffield. I thought the home of football was Sheffield, so why aren't we there? Well, I've come to that other great northern city across the Pennines, Manchester. But why Manchester, you cry? What contribution did Manchester make towards early association football development? They only had one team in the 1860s, Hume Aveneum of 1863, and they had to play Sheffield rules and Sheffield teams since no other association football club formed in Manchester until well into the 1870s. Well, here's why. So before we get down to summarising all we have done in the first 12 videos and giving our conclusions, I thought we'd better make a visit to our National Football Museum here in Manchester, just to check I haven't missed anything important, and maybe give them a chance to explain the Hall of Fame entry for Cambridge University, and maybe its fictitious 1856 football club as the oldest in the world. Maybe? Well, let me say first of all, the National Football Museum is actually very good. It's full of great stuff to see about football, especially from fairly recent history. The staff at the museum were also very friendly and helpful, as you will see in a minute. The National Football Museum isn't, however, a place where you'll actually learn anything much about the game's early history and development. They will tell you about the FA's early rules here, but nothing about Sheffield's 1858 rules, or Sheffield's influence on developing the FA's own code in 1863. There's nothing about how the rules we have today are an amalgamation of both Sheffield's and the FA's codes evolving from 1877 onwards. The National Football Museum tells you nothing of how the Sheffield FA convinced the English FA not to dissolve itself in 1867 due to flagging interest. How, if it was not for Sheffield, this place might be called the National Rugby Museum instead. The National Football Museum does show you lots about the FA Cup and lots of other shiny trophies, but nothing of the Yoden or Cromwell Cups. There are lots of tributes to various people involved with the game over the years, but nothing about Creswick, Prest or Yoden. In fact, information about Sheffield FC or anything from Sheffield and its historical contribution, well, absolutely nothing at all. Disappointing, National Football Museum. One interesting thing that did happen, I couldn't find the Hall of Fame to see information about Cambridge University AFC. I thought I'd find it in here. After seeing 4 staff, I was eventually told the information was all online and it was an online tribute, not an actual exhibit. Well, with the member of staff we looked online, but we still couldn't find anything. The only thing I could find was this Cambridge University webpage report. But when the member of staff realised why I wanted to see this exhibit and that I was from Sheffield, she suddenly became very apologetic. And this was because she realised there was nothing in the museum about Sheffield. She then wanted to go on camera and state this. Who is the oldest football team in the world?
Sheffield FC in England, but unfortunately we haven't got much on it, but we're hoping future we will have more on the team display. And them being the oldest, yeah.
And Sheffield's contribution to football?
The rules, way before Ebenezer Morley's rules. And they were that old, they had no other teams to play. They used to play each other. So married men, unmarried men, they used to do the first set of the alphabet, the letters, they used to set the alphabet.
And where are we?
We're in Manchester, which is the birthplace of the professional football league, Piccadilly Gardens.
And so we're in a museum, yeah?
Yes, we are.
Which is the
National Football Museum, yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
So well done, Victoria, and well done, National Football Museum. Apology accepted, but please do something about it. Between you and me, the staff at the National Football Museum seem to know that the Cambridge University claims are non-credible. They have moved on. However, I don't think it's dawned on them yet that if it wasn't for Sheffield, there wouldn't be association football and there wouldn't be a National Football Museum. Just for the record, I don't have anything against Manchester. It's important you know I was actually born around here, in Bolton. I have many happy memories, such as coming into Manchester every Saturday morning to spend my pocket money at Piccadilly Records. I love the place and its people. It also has 2 half-decent football clubs, and at least one of them still plays in the city. I have no gripe with Manchester, but why is our National Football Museum here and not in the true home of football, Sheffield? I just know we would do a much better job at portraying the game's very early developments and explain its birth properly. So, not having learnt anything new from Manchester other than they are aware of their crimes, let's get back over the hills to Sheffield. We need to do our summary, recap and conclusion of the whole series. Okay, video 1. We started the entire series in the B&Q car park where East Bank, Sheffield FC's first ground, was. If you are unaware, we do know where association football began and was born. It was at East Bank, now the Queen's Road B&Q car park. In the video I tried to explain why I wanted to make the series. I did this to try and stop the nonsense we constantly see on social media and across all media when journalists and commentators talk about the history of football. I pointed out that we need to define exactly what it is we are trying to find the history of. We're trying to find the history of association football. We're trying to find the roots of our game as we know it today. We're not trying to look for the roots of any form of ball game played, or any codes written down that had no influence on how the game developed. Without hopefully not sounding too critical, I am surprised by how many writers of football history don't seem to grasp this basic premise. The premise of what they are actually trying to write about. You can guarantee that most football history books will start discussing folk football, people in ancient times kicking a ball about, which is okay, but generally they tend to fail to define these activities from what later became association football. The two things are very different. Let me give you an example. Yes, John Hope in Edinburgh in 1824 did have what he called a football club, and yes, it did have some rules. But John Hope's elite gathering didn't lead on to influence the development of association football as it is today. The formation of Sheffield FC and its rules very much did. I hope you see the difference. Future books and commentaries please make a clearer distinction between what did and didn't influence how our game developed. I include what happened at Cambridge University from the late 1830s onwards in this plea. Our second and third videos focused on the rules and on the extent to which Cambridge University influenced those rules. We know through such connections between Reverend Sunderland of Penistone and John Shaw and others, it is fair to note that there must have been influences between Cambridge and Sheffield, as many leaders of the game's development in Sheffield had their educational history linked back to Cambridge, either directly or by association through knowing others. We know our current rules are a mixture of both codes, amalgamated, so credit needs to be cited for Cambridge University here. Yes, in 1863 the Sheffield rules and the Cambridge rules did influence how the FA's code was formed. But there is no evidence that Cambridge University and their rules are the oldest code written by an association football club, since there is no evidence that Cambridge University Association Football Club, the same club that's supposed to be in the National Football Museum's Hall of Fame, there's no evidence that this club ever existed before 1873. The codes from Cambridge, if they did exist, and there is no first-hand evidence that they did, but if they did exist before 1858, then they were written by enthusiastic students, not an association football club. We concluded that Sheffield FC's 1858 rules are the first from an association football club. In video 2 we also saw that Sheffield FC laid down the first model for an association club. A model and a template that other clubs could follow. And the important thing here is that other clubs formed and they did follow this template. Sheffield FC's rules were of course an important part of this standardisation and organisation of the game. Finally, important to mention that we concluded that Hallam is the second oldest association football club, playing at the oldest ground in the world as recognised by the Guinness Book of Records and FIFA. In our fourth video we talked about Sheffield's developing football culture growing through an explosion of early organised clubs and matches across the city. Some of these matches influencing the development of clubs in other cities, like in Nottingham. We saw that games even took place that involved non-organised clubs, such as Hillsborough Barracks against Sheffield FC. But all were contributing to the game's growth and development. This was the first time any form of football culture like this had developed anywhere. Video 5 focused on a pivotal but seismic moment in association football history. The burning down of a theatre that led to the genius idea of a competitive association football tournament, the Oden Cup. The Oden Cup was a template for all tournaments after it, including the FA Cup, the World Cup, and any other cup you care to mention. Again, journalists and commentators stating in modern times that the FA Cup is the first and oldest trophy in the world basically insults Sheffield's contribution, especially when you realise it was Sheffield FC and the Sheffield FA that kept the English FA going and stopping it from dissolving itself in the late 1860s, giving the FA time to develop its own competitive cup, which during the 1870s successfully fought off the rising challenge from alternatives like rugby. Association football nationally may have only lasted 4 years if it wasn't for the influence of Sheffield and its many clubs. We had to give at least one video in the series up to Sheffield FC, and we did this in video 6. We looked at the club's history but also took the time to realise just why this still relatively small Sheffield amateur club quite rightly holds the FIFA Order of Merit, one of only 2 clubs anywhere. This same recognition of its huge importance to the game needs to start coming from institutions like the National Football Museum and its own National FA it previously helped to save. Video 7 asked a simple question. The same we're trying to answer here, I guess. Where is the home of football? We looked at other sports' home and concluded that the birth of the organised forms of individual sports is a good rule of thumb to use when deciding a sport's home. So why not Sheffield with its 58 firsts and indisputable evidence that the organised version of the game started in this city and nowhere else? Video 8 simply tried to answer the question of where the oldest hotel and pub clubs formed and also where they played. In the case of pubs, I think we did make a lot of progress identifying the location of Hounsfield Park, and in doing so put the focus on one pub in particular, the Wellington at Shalesmoor, which still exists. I think the jury's still got one foot out the door on this one, but for now we have to make judgments based on what we know. Video 9 was a mop-up exercise trying to give more correct information about some of Sheffield's very early but still fascinating clubs. We also saw just how many grounds existed in such a small area just south of the centre of Sheffield in the early years of the game. It's important that we know about these early lost Sheffield clubs. These clubs may have only lasted a few years, but they did have an enormous impact on the growth of the game. They kept the fire burning while others across the country and later across the world caught up. In video 10, while covering 4 lost clubs and their grounds, we asked the question, what is a football club? This brought us full circle to this issue from video 1 of writers, commentators and journalists needing to understand what it is they're writing about when it comes to association football history. In other words, what is an association football club? We concluded that unorganised kickabouts, nice as they are, as we witnessed mainly in London in the late 1850s, are not organised association football clubs. It is fair to point out that some of these so-called clubs did become organised later. Finally, videos 11 and 12, which you may have recently watched, they try to highlight the true and enormous significance Sheffield had on the game's early development and growth. If you recall, this chart identified 49 clubs out of 95 in the whole world that had formed at the time. 49 of them came from Sheffield before 1875. In this video, we defined the early history of football into 4 eras and discovered that over 50% of all the world's clubs in the first 2 eras of the game, between 1857 and 1875, came from just one town, Sheffield. This today is like having the Premier League, the Championship and some of League One all playing just in one town. In video 12 we did conclude that Sheffield is association football's true birthplace and home. Okay, that brings us to the end of our series, ladies and gentlemen. The Real History of Football, Sheffield, the home of football. As we continue to wander and fly around this wonderful city, before we finish, I want to ask what I've learnt from doing all this, if anything. Well, yes, actually. I've learnt that Sheffield has far more than I realised in terms of contribution to the game's history. And I was already a massive advocate for its claim to be the home of football. I've learnt that Sheffield's contribution to association football is so massive it actually makes some of its battles irrelevant. Let me explain. Even if the oldest football clubs and rules of association football did not originate in Sheffield, and I'm not saying this is the case, but let's just imagine for a minute association football could be proven to have started in, say, Milton Keynes. If that was the case, then Sheffield would still be the home of football. This is because of everything the city did to develop the game after the roots of the sport had begun to sprout, wherever that took place. Sheffield's contribution to the game is not just having the first club and the first association club rules, it's much, much more than that. The city took these roots and got them to grow into other clubs, other forms of competition, into a culture that spread across a city, across a country, and became widely popular. If these roots had been invented somewhere else, Sheffield would still be the game's home because of how it grew, developed and protected the game for 20 of its most vulnerable years. When you then realise it did also invent the game's roots, the enormity of what the sport owes to Sheffield becomes apparent. Sheffield is a proud city. It's given a lot over the years, socially, economically, historically, and in truth it gets little credit, recognition, respect back for its achievements. One of those oversights is massive. It's the refusal of those who should know better to give Sheffield true respect and recognition as the place association football, the game the world loves, the place the game was invented in, born in, nurtured in, was saved in, grew up and whose home it truly should be called, to give it its fully deserved respect. OK world, having seen this series, what do you think? Now is your chance. One final request from me to my adopted city, to the people of Sheffield. I asked the people of Sheffield and hopefully others who love the place beyond to do one thing. You know that look you get when you say to people from outside Sheffield, football is from Sheffield? You know that part surprised, part are you pulling my leg, part you don't know what you're talking about look? Well, next time, don't cower, don't back away. First, politely explain to them what association football is, the game we have today. Then don't stop, go on. Look them in the eye and tell people far and wide Sheffield is not just association football's birthplace, not just where you'll find the game's oldest clubs, grounds, stadiums, matches, etc. Tell the full story about how it gave birth to competitive football, its oldest tournaments, the first football culture, etc. Tell them how all this inspired other cities to follow suit once football had made its way into the wider world. Tell them about its world firsts and significant contributions, 58 of them. Tell them how Sheffield once saved football from abandonment by the English FA. Tell them how association football has the oldest trademark in the world, made in Sheffield. Finally, tell them nowhere else on the planet can make these claims. And yes, you're not joking. You do know what you're talking about, and it is true. Don't hold back. The rest of you, please start listening. Hopefully these videos have given you the tools and confidence to do all that. Once that's done, tell them about the fantastic Sheffield Home of Football walking app and send them off towards football's birthplace, the B&Q car park off Queen's Road, East Bank. Finally, you could tell them about this series. Share the videos. You need to know these videos aren't monetarised in any way, shape or form. I get no help, and I'm doing this to get the message out that Sheffield is the home of football. If any money ever does come from these videos, then you can be reassured it will help to pay for all the many plaques and signs we need around the city to mark its numerous important historical sites. OK, ranting finished. That's 13 videos, the real history of football, Sheffield, the home of football. Hopefully by the time you next visit Sheffield, we'll have more signs and plaques, and even a museum to offer more help and information. Sheffield FC may even have built their new ground. Next time won't be part of this series, but there are other topics, other areas I would like to highlight, but I've not been able to mention in any detail during this series. So there will be other videos in future at some point. Many thanks for all your support out there and for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the series. Please like, subscribe, and as ever, if you have one, please leave a helpful comment. Till next time!
Hey, you guys, pick up.